all the way from sunny Ironbridge, who is going to tell us about serving a resolution, industrial heritage support in a COVID climate. And I understand, Mike, I don't know if he still is, but he's flooded out. It isn't just a COVID climate, it's a changed climate. Okay, Mike, over to you.
Before Mike starts, can I just say, everyone else, can you just mute your mics, please? Because otherwise, every time you cough, we all hear it across the world, everywhere from New York to goodness knows where. So just mute your mics if you're not Mike, and I'm going to mute my mic as well.
Right.
Over to you.
Thank you, Alan. Thanks very much, Mary. Yes, unfortunately, my Ironbridge office is in the long warehouse in the gorge and is above the floods, but Ironbridge has had 2 museums flooded out this year for the 3rd time in 3 years, and each time we're told it's a 100-year event. So that's 300-year events in 3 years. Yes, a changed climate, very much so. So it's great to be able to talk to you this evening. What I'm going to do over the next 50 minutes, hour, is to give you a flavour of what I do as the Industrial Heritage Support Officer for England, how that works, and perhaps what the future might be in terms of that project. So, and I'm going to start off by looking at the who does what in industrial archaeology and heritage, and then I'll introduce the IHSO project, which actually goes back to 2012, and then we'll have a look at some of the problems in lockdown and caused by climate change, and then I shall round off. I should begin by saying that I took up this post 3 weeks before the pandemic hit at the end of March 2020, with some brilliant timing, moving from the University of Salford. And I had 3 weeks in the office, which overlooks Abram Darby's 1709 furnace, and then I didn't see Ironbridge again for 6 months. The intention was always for me to work 1 or 2 days a week down at Ironbridge, to go out and visit industrial heritage sites and to offer online support. But COVID just really accelerated that process. So enough of my personal work habits. Other than to say that, yes, that is my photograph of the Ironbridge, and yes, that was photographed last week, but obviously this evening I'm not in Ironbridge. Right, so the project goes back to 2012, and it was actually set up on the back of 2 reports, one undertaken in 1998, and then an update undertaken by Sir Neil Cousins in 2008, looking at the number of industrial heritage sites open to the public and preserved in England, and really how that sector was coping, who was running it, and what support it was needed for that for those groups of sites. As I said, I'll come to what I do as IHSO in a moment, but just to say that this slide shows you a sort of snapshot of the circa 600, and I say circa 600 because every year there are new sites, and every year some sites go out of public accessibility, but it is still about 600 sites run by around about 400 organisations, from big museums to just a group of 3 or 4 people up and down England. And you can see there's a fairly good coverage in terms of those 600 preserved sites open to the public, ranging from transport to wind and water mills, to extractive industries, to manufacturing industry, and the like. Obviously, there are tens and tens of thousands of industrial archaeology and heritage sites in England, let alone Wales or Scotland. So this is very much the top band that is open to the public and that's interpreted to the public. And that is, of course, why that sort of circa 600 number keeps changing in terms of the details of who's on there and who's not. Which brings me to who does what in industrial archaeology and heritage. Now, it'll come as no surprise to you down in Greenwich that, of course, the voluntary sector is very, very important in researching and presenting industrial heritage. You know all about that. But we do have some facts and figures over the last 10 years from research undertaken by Council of British Archaeology, who are based in York, and they're the leading UK archaeology charity, and also the birth mother of industrial heritage and archaeology in the UK, having sponsored the first industrial archaeology conference in London in 1959, and that's the national conference, and also having sponsored and promoted industrial archaeology in the 60s and 70s. And back in 2012, they published their own industrial archaeology handbook in their archaeology handbook series. So they've kept an eye on the voluntary sector since at least the mid-1940s, when they were established. And they've recorded a steady growth in the number of societies and the people involved in them. And 2 surveys in 2009, and then again in 2015, and Historic England also looked at this area in 2016 in terms of local local history societies, really show the strength of that sector. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people involved in archaeology and heritage and history up and down the UK. Of course, we all know that COVID has changed things in terms of what's done online and meeting online. And I'm sure when this survey is repeated, we'll probably see that there's a far greater emphasis of online working. But you can't beat meeting people in the flesh and actually working together and chatting together out in the field. So on the face of it, that's quite a positive story. There are we think, over 2,000 local societies, archaeology, industrial and history societies up and down the country. As ever, many of those societies back in the 1980s reported an ageing demographic, and the same was reported in 2009, and the same was reported in 2015. It may just be a product of how those societies are run and who has the time available to run them. We also have the commercial sector for archaeology. Archaeology became very much commercial business for the majority of professionals working in the UK in the early 1990s. At the moment, there are over 6,500 professional archaeologists at work in the UK. That's spread across 350 archaeology units, consultancies and sole traders. And that's overseen by the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists. And they have a registered archaeological organisation scheme. They have 83 groups, businesses in that. But also that includes university departments as well, and museums. And they also have membership. It's an individual membership body as well for professional archaeologists. And there's about 4,000 of those 6,500 professional archaeologists who are members of the Chartered Institute for Archaeologists. And I mention that because the vast majority of primary field work is done either by the voluntary sector in industrial archaeology and heritage, or by the commercial sector, the archaeological units. And these are some facts and figures I put together for industrial archaeology and post-medieval archaeology activity between 1990 and 2010. There's absolutely no reason to think that these figures are any different in 2012. And the key thing here is that 2/3 of all professional archaeological work undertaken in the UK involves post-medieval and industrial deposits. That's an incredibly important resource to draw on. And we know the kind of things that are being excavated below ground and recorded as buildings above ground. If you flick through the pages of post-medieval archaeology and industrial archaeology review published by the Association for Industrial Archaeology, these are the two leading journals for industrial archaeology and heritage in not just in the UK, but in Europe as well and beyond. You'll see some very typical industrial sites here, from brickmaking and canals to limeworks, mines and quarries, textile mills, water mills. There are also some other areas which have received attention, increasingly workers' housing, for instance, as the sort of corollary to the manufacturing side. It's the industrialisation of people's working lives, of course. And we're also starting to look at graveyards and burials from the 18th and 19th centuries, which has really been highlighted, I think, by HS2, the excavations of the big graveyards in Euston in London and Birmingham, New Street, for HS2 phase 1, where we've got 30 or 40,000 bodies excavated from the 18th and 19th centuries, but plenty of other smaller cemeteries of our period, if you like, has also been studied. And then we have a very strong museum sector. I've mentioned those 600 sites that are preserved and open to the public in England. There's another 200 or so spread across Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland. Not all of these have formal museum accreditation. About half, less than half of those 400 organisations running those 600 sites have that formal accreditation. But the museum sector receives funding from a wide variety of sources, including Arts Council England and the National Heritage Lottery Fund. And it's very much based around, for industrial heritage sites, it's very much based around the experience, quite often with moving objects, whether they be steam trains or stationary machinery. There are many societies, industrial archaeology, industrial heritage societies, and history societies scattered across the UK. We have local societies, regional and county societies. We have some national societies. You'll be aware of the Railway and Canal Historical Society, Newcomen Society. I mentioned the AIA and the Society for Post-Medieval Archaeology. But I know in my role as IHSO and working with the AIA that local industrial archaeology and heritage societies remain very strong and have a long tradition of research output. And many of those have received since 1994 heritage lottery funding, national heritage lottery funding, as we would call it now. And there's certainly a big upsurge in looking at industrial sites with community groups because of that heritage lottery money. And of course, we also have about 10 or 11 World Heritage Sites that are based around industry. That includes the most recent one that's been given that status, which is the North Wales Slate Landscapes, which was given that status last summer in 2021, which rather balanced the loss of World Heritage status for the Liverpool waterfront. But you can see the other kind of sites that have had World Heritage status since 1986. The first one of these in the UK to have such status was Ironbridge back in '86. And we've also got an all-parliamentary party group on industrial heritage and have had for about 10 years. In fact, it meets tomorrow. And they published a report in 2018 looking at where the key areas, some of the key areas for future support for our industrial heritage sector. You can see here conservation, promoting conservation, increasing voluntary skills for industrial archaeology and heritage, and improving public access as well. So we are, industrial heritage and archaeology is actually quite a significant part of the heritage sector. Some bits more prominent than others. I would say the heritage railways are probably the flagship in terms of public perception for the sector. And then you've got big museums like Beamish and Black Country Museum and Ironbridge. So the the reason the IHSO project was set up way back in 2012 was because whilst some of those big museums and the heritage railways were able to raise quite a bit of money and organise themselves, that left hundreds of smaller industrial heritage sites who were really working on their own or working with very small networks. So the initial 1998 survey of industrial heritage sites identified where these were. And then Sir Neil Cousins really raised the issue in his 2008 report about how sustainable all these industrial heritage sites were and what support they might need to keep them going, to make sure these preserved industrial heritage sites are there for future generations. So he actually came up with the suggestion for the IHSO project, which would look at supporting improving sustainability and conservation standards across those 600 sites and the 400 groups running them, helping them to enhance their operating practices and capacity, and also trying to make sure that this post wasn't there just for 1 or 2 years, but it was actually had a substantial run period to help really keep this legacy going. And we're now a decade into the post, with the post set to continue for the next few years as well, which is really good news. In fact, I saw David Perrett in the audience, so just let David know, and the rest of you know, that Historic England will be funding the IHSO post for another 3 years, and hopefully we can keep it going beyond then. I'll just give you a quick look of where some of these sites are in terms of regions. You will not be surprised to hear that each region has its own industrial heritage and archaeology flavour. I grew up in the northwest of England, and we have lots of textile mills, for instance. The northeast of England, lots and lots of mining, particularly minerals such as lead. Yorkshire, it's woolen industry and steel. West Midlands, lots of metal bashing, of course, but there's also plenty of canals, and there's also lots of coal. And then you get to East Midlands. East Midlands is sort of split between the textile mills of the Derwent Valley and around, and the lace making of Nottinghamshire and Leicestershire. And then you get into the drainage landscapes of the fens around Lincolnshire, which you see also in the East Midlands, where there's lots of windmills, and also there's lots of water corn mills as well. And then in the southwest, it's textiles and tin that are very dominant. And then that brings us into southeast England and London, which again has a sort of very distinctive element. There's definitely a thread in the southeast and London for pumping stations around water and sewage, as well as mineral processing, so the chalk downland areas, of course, and quite a number of windmills and water mills. One of the things I was able to do in lockdown was revisit that 600 list that was initially put together in 1998, and then which Sir Neil had looked at again briefly in 2008. And I looked at it in 2 ways. First way was, what have we got in terms of the percentage of different types of sites? So you can see here on this multicoloured donut that there are 3 big groups of type sites: windmills and water mills. That's water mills in this case being corn grinding water mills, account for 42% of all of these preserved sites open to the public. But of course, they're also amongst the smallest sites, both physically quite often, but also in terms of the number of people running them. And then behind that, we have transport. So those three groups of sites, 3 types of sites, account for 60% of what you can see in industrial heritage when you go out into the landscape. with the metal industry behind it, next behind at 10%. And then if we look at who's running what, about 44% of those sites are run by charities and trusts. And then we've got 18% run by local authorities, but that is down from 25% in 2008. And it is an area which continues to shrink as local authorities have problems with their budgets, and they prioritise frontline services, and frankly, heritage is not a frontline service. And you also notice quite a significant number are run as businesses, typically things like breweries or corn mills. And in this group here, only 9% of the 400 organisations running this particular group of sites, these industrial heritage sites, are actually accredited museums. There's quite a few more who are working towards formal accreditation. That's accreditation through the Museums Association. One of the reasons to be accredited is that it gives you access to other funding streams from national government. And you'll see that there's quite a big voluntary private group. That's where you've got these really small sites run by just a small group of people, giving support to the that sort of 40% of those sites who are small and run by small physically and run by small groups, is really a key part of what the IHSO, what the Industrial Heritage Support Officer post does and has been since 2012. And it's as much about getting them to network and talk to other groups within their region as it is talking to them individually about what their needs might be. As the project has developed over the last decade, it's developed various ways of providing communication for those organisations running industrial heritage sites in England. So before the pandemic hit, we already had, I say we, there's only one of me, but that's we as in I have a steering group who provides support for the IHSO project, and I have colleagues in Historic England who I'm in weekly contact with, and then there are my colleagues at Ironbridge itself. So there is only one of me, but it is a collective effort. We already had an online strategy, so we already had 2 websites, one for the industrial heritage networks, which I'll talk about in a moment, one for the wider industrial heritage support. You can see there that one, the industrial heritage networks, is for stories and member news. The industrial heritage support website is for initiatives and latest guidance. So, for instance, I've just put up some blogs today talking about the Heritage Open Days, which are now open for registration, and also the new grant fund stream that Historic England has opened for what they're aiming at is sort of working class stories, but actually it's ideal for many industrial archaeology and heritage sites. And then you'll see there's also Facebook and Twitter. Facebook is for sort of general news, more immediate news, and Twitter is very much of the moment for news and help. And these provide a regular flow of updates to engage and inform the volunteers and owners of those sites. I've been playing around with developing a closed Facebook group for one of the regional networks, which we'll talk about in a moment, the Northwest one, because that's where I'm based, and I know virtually everybody in all the museums. It's quite clear that having a closed group where people can chat privately and informally is a good thing, but getting them to actually do it is harder. So that's something we're mulling over at the moment, how we might expand that. And here are the 10 industrial heritage networks. When I took over the post in March 2020, we had 7 established. My immediate predecessor, Joanna Turska, who actually moved to the Canal and River Trust in Birmingham, so just sort of moved sideways, had established these networks in 2018 and 2019 as physical face-to-face entities. And that was with sort of help from people like the Canal Rivers Trust and English Heritage National Trust, and a variety of other regional and national groups. We made the decision at the end of March 2020 to take these online as the only way of keeping them going. And since then, we've been able to establish a further 3. So we now have 10 of these networks. You can see here the initial 7 networks and where they initially met. The idea was that we would pick a host, the host would pick a theme, we'd all get together and we'd talk about that theme, and this would sort of ignite discussion and help partnership working. It's great, not possible during COVID and lockdown, and as we come out of the pandemic, there's still quite a bit of reluctance to meet on a regular basis. Having said all of that, I found that bringing people together online enabled, particularly the smaller organisations, to dedicate more time to a 2-hour meeting, whereas if we were meeting in person, then that might involve taking a whole day out of their schedule, which for certainly those smaller sites can be more problematic. And also, these, the 10 regions that we have for England for these groups, they're quite big. Northwest England, it's 200 miles from north to south. Yorkshire's absolutely enormous as well, and East Anglia. Every region you look has really serious problems about traversing it. Even London, there are issues getting from one end to the other of London in a timely manner. So going online actually really helped bringing people together for these industrial heritage networks. The future of these networks is online, but I'm hoping we'll also be able to have meetings occasionally in person as well. But the future is going to be mainly online for these. The London group met at Crossness Engines in May 2019, and we had 27 organisations there and 35 members turned up. We were planning. We had a second meeting planned for November 2019, but that was delayed because Joanna left and I didn't come into post in March. And then before we could, I had about 3 or 4 emails to set it up again, and then COVID hit. So I would like to get to House Mill at some stage, possibly this year, to get people physically together. But in terms of the virtual meeting, we'll be starting the next round of Industrial Heritage Network meetings next month. London will be the first. Now, because I during lockdown, I was able to go through that list of 600 sites on a regional basis. We've really with my colleagues at Historic England, we've really started to look at the character of these preserved industrial heritage sites on a regional basis that are open to the public. And we've begun to put together quite a detailed list about where these sites are, what the characters of those sites are, who owns them, whether they're free to entry, whether it's paid entry, what online resources they have, and things like that. So we started to put together maps such as this. So I thought you might want to see this for London. At the moment, this excludes transport and corn grinding, wind and water mills. So this covers about 60% of the industrial heritage sites, type sites. So corn grinding and transport cover the other 40%. So we're about to do those. But you can see here that the type of sites we've got, and also the sites that are also no longer open to the public, so that they're in red, and the newly identified post-2008 sites are in green, which just indicates some of the movement in this sector. You will know better than me, but the 3 sites I've got here that are no longer open to the public are Young's Brewery, the Whitbread Brewery, and the Wapping Hydraulic Power Station. Why that is the case? Well, as I've said, there is quite a bit of movement in these industrial heritage sites in terms of what's open and what is not. So there are specific individual reasons for these. The sites have not been lost. In fact, going through the lists, I don't think I've come across a site which has been demolished, which is really positive. But obviously, I have 20 or 30 that are no longer accessible to the public since 2008. And the type sites in these particular London sites, remember this is excluding transport and wind and water mills. You can see here that I've got a breakdown here across 3 topics. The top left-hand one relates to the Historic England's industrial archaeology strategy. They have a series of 5 themes, and there are two of those crop up in London. There'll be more once I look at the wind and water mill and transport. We've also got, and then I've got monuments and site types as well, just so that we can get a feel. And I said that each region has its own flavour. So you can see there water and drainage, telecommunications, food and drink, manufacturing. It makes London quite distinctive in terms of its industrial archaeology. I know we can add water mills to that, and I know we will add transport as well. But you can see the quite distinctive flavour there. And this is all the reason I'm doing this. The reason the project is supported by Historic England and also by the Association for Industrial Archaeology and Ironbridge Gorge Museum Trust, and we've also had financial support in the past from the Association for Independent Museums, is because there is no overarching support, no overarching place where you can go for advice or signposting for industrial heritage in England, even though we have world-class industrial heritage. And this is a sector that is facing some acute problems, two particular problems around climate change and the after effects of COVID. And that's the sort of a final third of what I want to talk about this evening. This is what I was faced with when I arrived at Ironbridge in March 2020. It had just been flooded. And it turns out this is the first of the 3 flood events that the gorge faced. And climate change, particularly changes to the way in which rain falls. We're not necessarily, it's having a particular impact on industrial heritage sites because so many have an element of water management, and quite a lot are actually based on or around rivers. So you can see here the gorge and the Severn warehouse, the museum of the gorge, flooded in February 2020, and there were floods again the following month as well. So this is a particular problem. Flooding in terms of climate change is probably the most obvious impact of the climate moving. And as I said, it's not so much that it's increased rainfall. It's the same amount of rainfall, but over a shorter period, which means you get more intense rain, you get erosion events, and you get flooding events in major river catchments like this. But we also have to remember that we have increasing storms with increasing wind power. There are 2 sites here, 2 windmills in the east of the country. One damaged in February 2020 at the top there. I don't know how to pronounce that. Brufflemarsh, I'm sure that's the wrong pronunciation. And then Mount Pleasant Mill, which was damaged back in 2015. And in fact, there's a whole string of windmills that were damaged due to storms just this century. Whether that's increasing is difficult to say. And when it comes to flooding, it's not just the flooding events themselves. Landslips are a particular problem which seem to be increasing because the ground gets sodden with all that rain. Heritage railways have noticed this over the last decade. Canal and River Trust has an issue with ground slip as well. They recently had an embankment slippage on one of the Midland canals, which forced them to close the canal. So damage to infrastructure, historic industrial infrastructure like this is definitely going to increase as our climate changes. But it's not just about the rain, it's also about the extremes of wetting and drying on buildings. It's the increased risk of fire to buildings over prolonged dry spells. And also we get changes in pests and diseases which will attack the sort of organic parts of buildings, particularly the wooden trusses and wooden window frames, the wood in machinery. And the problem of urban sites, urban heat islands, buildings overheating is also starting to increase as well. The most, apart from the problems with rain, the most acute problem in the industrial heritage sector in terms of climate change is actually the move away from coal. Now, the heritage railway sector, and we have nearly 200 preserved heritage railways in the UK, have been working on this as a problem for the last 4 or 5 years. Just last month, there were some experiments in bio-coal for mainline steam locomotives. There are particular problems with the use of coal in locomotives because you need the right size of coal that burns at the right rate in order to keep your multi-tube boiler going. So that's the most prominent bit, and we may be moving towards a solution, but the war in Ukraine appears to have cut off supply of Russian coal, and Russian coal was going to be part of the interim solution whilst the sector sorted out bio-coal. So what that's going to do for the steaming season this year is unclear. And then there's also stationary steam engines. There are fewer museums running stationary steam engines than locomotives. There's about 24, 26 that run stationary steam engines on coal. And it's not clear that any of them have really considered alternative fuels. It's slightly easier to use alternative fuels for stationary steam engines than it is for locomotives because the tolerances tend to be wider. But I think the lack of Russian coal is really going to cause problems for those stationary steam engines in museums this summer. And quite simply, we may see, for instance, pumping stations not using coal, not being able to run because they don't have a proper supply of coal. And that's ignoring the fact that, digging coal out of the ground in the UK is not something we are going to be doing on a mass basis for very much longer. I should say the whole of this sector, doesn't use a great deal of coal. A couple of 100,000 tonnes. Stationary steam engines perhaps use 30,000 tonnes a year. So it's not contributing much to the climate, but it is. The problem here is finding the supply and also the perception. And then there's COVID. We've all experienced the problems of lockdown and meeting people over the last 2 years. It's not a surprise to hear that in 2020, only 50% of all industrial heritage sites in England managed to open. And that's as a result of some survey work I did over the summer and autumn of 2020. So that's a pretty good figure. That's a pretty accurate figure. And then again, we had 3 lockdowns. We had the big lockdown at the beginning of 2020. Then we had the November 2020 lockdown, and then we had the 3rd lockdown over the first 4 months of 2021. you can, so we've had 2 years where many sites have not been open very much. Some sites have been closed, particularly smaller sites, small windmill sites, corn mills. Many of those have just been closed since the beginning of 2020, actually since before then, because of course, as you will know, the industrial heritage sector is cyclical. A large number of sites, more than 50% of sites, are closed from the end of October through to Easter. That's the traditional period when they're closed. And so we did have sites that closed in October 2019 and did not open again until the summer of 2021. Although by September 2021, when we had Heritage Open Days going, virtually all, about 98% of these industrial heritage sites had reopened. And you can see here the 3 lockdowns and the percentage of sites closed and open after each of these, just to sort of make that point that it's been a very tough time for these industrial heritage sites. Vandalism's been an issue. Avon Museum was vandalised the very weekend they reopened in April 2021. Having said that, there was some interesting statistics from the corn milling sector, the commercial corn milling sector, who throughout 2020 saw an uptick, quite a big uptick in demand for corn, not because corn was in short supply, but because the bigger corn milling companies couldn't get hold of bigger bags, and these smaller artisan corn mills could do. Also have to point out that 470 redundancies between March 2020 and December 2021 in industrial heritage sites in England. And the worry is that as cultural recovery funding is withdrawn, we might well see more redundancies down the line. And that 470 is just part of that wider heritage sector where there have been 3,000 or 4,000 redundancies over that period. And you can see how people adapt. Crofton Beam Engine, for instance, they brought in a shorter season, and they tried to use the period of lockdown for maintenance. Same with, one of the things we noticed with heritage railways, steam railways, they were the first to reopen after each of the lockdowns. And I think they're more business orientated models for running those sites really help them raise money to keep those railways going, particularly directly from the public, and that they led the way in online donations. If you just sort of take one sector in the industrial heritage world, we have 21 protected textile mills in England that are open to the public. All of them closed, of course, during the 3 lockdowns. Many of these did not open between the first and the second lockdown. There's obviously a northern bias here. We actually lost being open to the public Masson Mills in Derbyshire. The building's still there, but it's no longer open. It did not reopen after the first lockdown and has not done so. The shopping outlet there went out of business. The Derby Silk Museum was due to open, the new Museum of Making. It was due to open in 2020 and obviously due to lockdown, that was delayed and pushed back into 2021. And I ended up fielding quite a lot of queries in 2020 and 2021 from some of these mill sites, queries around financial support, where they could go to, and online, sort of moving onto online platforms. And there are some hidden costs of COVID, particularly around maintenance to the sites. You have to bear in mind that a number of these sites didn't actually have anybody visiting them for months on end. And that's left, for instance, sites running steam engines with boiler certificates going out of date. It's left some sites with leaky roofs that needed rapid repair. That's particularly noticeable in a couple of Cornish tin mine sites. Crofton Beam Engine is not the only site that has had an online appeal for funds for revamping their boiler. Fawnset Steam Museum in East Anglia did that as well, and Whitchurch Silk Mill in the summer and autumn that's just gone needed to raise money for restoring the water wheel. If you don't run the water wheel, it's a wooden water wheel. Don't run it in water; it dries out and starts to crumble. And then, of course, there's the issue of vandalism, which I've mentioned already. Interestingly enough, there has been a lot of money coming into the sector during the last 2 years because of the Cultural Heritage Recovery Fund, primarily, but also local councils and local charities have raised money for the wider heritage sector and industrial heritage in particular. And I mentioned that the steam heritage railways were very, very good at going directly to the public to raise money. Over £3.5 million raised in 2020 and 2021 for heritage railways directly from the public, for instance. And then you've got the national investment by the government in the Cultural Heritage Recovery Fund. It's a huge amount of money. It's nearly £800 million. There's over £50 million coming into the industrial heritage sector across all regions. And that's been distributed by Historic England and Arts Council England as well in 3 rounds. And in fact, now we're into a 4th round of cultural recovery funding, which has started to be announced. The recipients of that started to be announced this month. So, for instance, Ironbridge received £1 million for urgent maintenance. And there's a whole series of announcements coming out at the moment about that extra funding. And here, just so that you can see the breakdown of where the funding went in the first round of funding in October 2020. You'll see that some regions got more money than others. That's partly because it's not every industrial heritage site that I've been talking about applied for funding. Every site, all of those 400 organisations supporting those 600 sites were eligible to apply for funding, but not everybody did. And in particular, the small groups tended not to apply for national funding. Quite often they might apply for local funding, so the local parish council or the local council. But there was a perception amongst the smaller groups that, well, we can't apply for this money because we're not an accredited museum. That wasn't the case. But I think that speaks to the lack of resources that these small organisations have. I took the opportunity to specifically gather data around the impact of COVID when we were having our 10 Industrial Heritage Network meetings in 2020, 2022. And I was able to talk to 72 industrial sites, which is about 100 people. So about 11% of the total group I deal with. And we had a variety of comments about how they were adapting to COVID, what they were doing to adapt to COVID. Obviously changing shops and catering was one of the big themes. Lack of access to collections, problems with drainage and flooding from block gutters was a problem. But having volunteers keen to return, but the issue of making them go through safety training so that they were COVID compliant cropped up again and again and again. Using outdoor spaces was one way in which many museums were able to cope between lockdown if they had the physical space. And it was some sites noted that the younger volunteers were keen to return, whilst some of the older volunteers less keen. And I pulled out some of the comments for London from the meeting I had with London sites in October 2020, and this is very typical of some of the kind of responses to COVID I've seen up and down England. So Kempton Steam Museum did not open in 2020, and instead, in between lockdowns, chose to try and improve the museum. You can see at Wandle Industrial Museum, they had a problem with COVID hitting outreach, understandably, and lost a lot of income from the lack of school visits, for instance. Walthamstow retained their strong volunteer numbers and saw quite a sort of a decent return to visitors after the first lockdown. And some of these sites got cultural recovery funding, Crossness, I've mentioned before. And then some sites looked at digital booking systems, decided that it wasn't appropriate for them, such as the Carl Sholton Water Tower. So, with both COVID and climate change, I think what we can see is that this is a sector that is trying to adapt to changing circumstances. I think COVID has really sped up some of this adaptation to an online world, to a recognition that climate change is changing the way in which sites are going to be maintained and increasing the threat of flooding. Moving towards online resources, more online resources, is definitely a consequence of lockdown. And that's not just online meetings for volunteers and staff, but also free online resources for the public as well, and online events. And when I say online, it's not just websites; it's across social media. And the Black Country Museum, of course, became very famous for its TikTok short musical videos that really took off in 2020, for instance, and which have been used as an example of engagement training for the wider sector since then. So the Industrial Heritage Project has been going since 2012. I'm the fourth officer in post. Each officer has had to face an evolving series of issues for sector. And I think the last 2 years, as we all know, have been quite unique in our lifetime. And for heritage in general, it's been quite stressful. And it will take many years for the impact of COVID on the sector, both in terms of volunteer support, public support, and finances, and a backlog of maintenance to really unwind. And that's one of the reasons why Historic England were keen to continue funding the project, I am very glad to say. But in all of this, what we need to remember is that this is about celebrating this rich industrial heritage, of which the IHSO project is. That's part of what I'm trying to encourage these sites to do, trying to bring in new audiences. We are the first industrial country in the world. We have a legacy that goes around the globe. For good or ill, that industrialisation process is now a common factor of human existence wherever you are on the planet. And if you want to understand industrialisation, you come to Britain, because we were that first society. Bringing in new audiences, passing on good practice, building links with local communities, those are all things that the industrial heritage sector need to do, and there are some good examples of that going on. And of course, always remembering the person behind the object, the human aspect of industrialisation, and trying to link that, the past to the present, to make it relevant to a modern audience. So there you go. Thank you very much. And I shall stop sharing.
Thank you, Mike. That was great. We've got some questions coming in.
I did notice 18 things in the chat. Yes.
if there's a chat link at the bottom of the screen where if you want to type in your questions, we will take them one at a time. Firstly, Marie has said she's raised her hand. Marie, are you there? And can you unmute yourself? And
yes, I'm here. Hello.
Go on.
Hi. Thanks for that presentation. It was very informative. Appreciate it. I've got a couple of enquiries though. You did touch upon mainly sites. Of course, the sort of things going forward for the future. I wanted to know what available help is it for research on historical sites that have since disappeared and are only evidenced in terms of video recordings that were taken prior to demolition and archive material rescued from skips on an area that was at the time politically very sensitive. And I'm talking about the electricity industry, which I didn't see mentioned in any of your lists. Of course, it's very relevant now, tying in with climate.
Yes.
And there has been a severe lack of public support for looking into the area because of issues like asbestosis and government policy over fuel and so on. So there's a whole load of complex issues in regards to how to go forward with materials that are very important in terms of national industrial heritage that so far have been sidelined as far as I'm aware.
There is an issue around 20th century industrial archaeology. One of the issues with 20th century industrial archaeology.
The particular power station I'm talking about was built in the 19th century. I mean, it was the first of its kind, built by Sebastian de Ferrand. So, I mean, we're not talking about the 20th century here. We're talking about, it did go into the 20th, but it started after the mid 19th century.
There are gaps. There are gaps in the types of sites that are protected.
No, the site isn't anymore. It's been demolished. Along with
Mary.
Evidence exists in terms of video footage and rescue archives.
So there'll be a below ground archaeological resource to dig up, and then of course you're quite right with all that variety of other forms of media that record it. Trying to bring all that together remains a problem. There are museums that specialise in gathering that kind of data, but actually trying to find money and resources to put into that is an issue. Now, I don't have any solutions.
Yeah. I don't want to take up time from other people. I see that you're based in the Northwest, so presumably you're linked in with the Museum of Industry.
I know. Yeah, I do know.
Yeah, I've had quite a lot of dealings or attempted dealings with them in the past because of the Ferranti link.
Yes.
But unfortunately, at the time when I tried to get the archives housed there, they said no, we'd been given the instruction it had to be for the Northwest only. But could I request that I contact you, and then when I'm next in Manchester, which is where I'm from, I actually get some face-to-face advice from you?
Yeah, absolutely. Please drop me an email. Absolutely. I'd be happy to meet and chat. Definitely.
If you could give me pointers, because I think I've exhausted all the potential sources of help so far that I'm aware of.
Okay. I'll see what I can do. Drop me an email.
I will. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Murray. There's a few other comments I'll read out. Dave Perrett says there are a number of sites to your list that could be added to the listing for London. Dave, do you want to comment on that?
No, but I'll comment on the last person who was speaking.
Go on then.
There's a lot of I presume you were talking about Deptford Power Station, and a lot of the Deptford material was collected by the Science Museum. I went round Deptford just before it closed down, and the Science Museum have grabbed a lot of stuff from there. What they've done with it is always another question, because one of the interesting things in this industrial heritage is what role does the Science Museum play? Sometimes we think it.
Say that again, Dave. You broke up for a bit. Sometimes
I feel it was about, she was talking about Deptford Power Station, which actually wasn't the first main power station in London, but that's another matter. But the Science Museum took an awful lot of material from Deptford Power Station.
Hold on, Murray. Let Dave speak.
And we'll have it somewhere. God knows where. But that's the problem with the Science Museum.
Murray, do you want to respond? Murray, do you want to respond? Or should we move on? Okay. Elizabeth Piercy says the Brunel Museum wasn't mentioned also.
There are 600 museums in England that are preserved and open to the public. I am aware of the Brunel Museum, so it's not been overlooked. I can assure you.
That's good. They spoke to us about a year ago, I think it was, and it was a really fascinating talk. And and we've just been running through on the chat. Oh yes, Mary said, oh yes, there was a telecoms museum in Blackfriars. I remember taking the kids to it when they were really small and playing with fax machines, and BT just shuffled it all off to the Science Museum. John Freeman says about coal. Clay Mills Victorian pumping station has been considering coal alternatives, but nothing practicable. John, are you there? And do you want to say any bit more about that? You need to unmute yourselves. John?
Yes, that's really all I can say is we've been looking at it for a while. We like railways need coal of a particular size and grade and quality, and so far supplies, while not plentiful, have been there. Mike's quite right. It's an area of considerable concern, both in terms of, I guess, there are two concerns. One is, as it were, making sure we're not forgotten in the legal processes where they ban the burning of coal. And on the other side, the actual physical availability of the right coal, bearing in mind in particular the most recent events in the Ukraine. So I think everyone is, if they're not worried about it, ought to be worried about it.
Yeah, this is one of those unexpected consequences. Mike, do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I've been yes. Clay Mills is one of the sites I've been talking to over this, because it's great that they've been actually thinking about this problem. I think there is a certain amount of sticking your head in the sand going on, which is a bit worrying.
Try to say a bit more. What do you mean by who's sticking their head in what?
Well, I'm not going to name any names, but
no. But
no, but just that, with COVID and lockdown, there hasn't actually been very much steaming at all, and I think lots of these sites have been focusing on getting back up and running, and perhaps not thinking about where the supplies are going to come from, and in the current situation with the Ukraine and supplies from Russia, that's really caught. I think that's going to catch a lot of people out, but maybe that's a good thing, because it will make some of these sites really think about how they're going to run these stationary steam engines in the future.
Yes. Okay. Helen O'Hara says slides on the London public sites would be really useful on the Museum Development London. Helen, do you want to say anything about that and continue? You to unmute yourself, but Helen, if you're still there.
Hello, hello, sorry. Yes, hello, Mike. Really interesting to hear from you tonight.
Helen.
Thank you. Hello. You might well be interested to, I mean, the slides would be incredibly useful to us as museum development, just some of those stats. I'd love to pick your brains on if that's possible, but I understand.
Drop me a line, Helen. Drop me a line.
Yeah, thank you. Just and also you may, I'm sure you probably know, but there was the National Museums survey of a lot of the smaller museums, and that's now been published. So London region now has its own data, which is published on our website for the London region, specifically museums. Not all of them accredited, so accredited and other museums, whoever answered the survey. So we have lots of stats in common with most of those smaller sites, you know, the ones who didn't apply for cultural recovery funding, who either were feeling very left out or just didn't have the capacity to apply. So the small museums are exactly the same. It was the slightly larger independent ones who managed to access that funding, often the ones who had a fundraiser or somebody like that. So there's really like a whole level of you know, a whole layer of smaller museums that, like similar to the industrial sites, are really are having to or will have to really adapt to reduce numbers of visitors, particularly central London and things like that. You know, there's lots of common themes there, but really interesting to hear your point of view about all that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Helen.
Not really a question.
Elizabeth Piercy says, for stationary engines, electricity, hydrogen and natural gas are all possible and proved. Elizabeth, do you want to come in and talk about that, if your connection is up to it? If you're there, Elizabeth, aka Oliver. No, Mary, that's Mary. Elizabeth is not around. No. Okay.
Just commenting on that, if I may. Alternative fuels could be used, but certainly for us, it would require a huge amount of very expensive engineering to get it to work. The running costs would be greatly increased, and the experience would be very different.
Yeah.
The experience of burning coal is something that people like, steam trains and stationary engines.
It's that smell, isn't it? On the other hand, if we're not going to get coal imported into the country, it's going to put the cost up, isn't it?
And if we cannot burn coal, we need to do something else. I absolutely agree with that.
Yeah. Mike, do you want to come back on that?
I just say John's absolutely right. There are some museums that have converted their stationary steam engines already to other fuel sources, but that's been over the last 5-10 years. So it's perfectly possible to do. But as John says, each of those stationary steam engines is museums has a unique set of circumstances, and raising the money to convert it is a problem. And I think we may have to accept that we're just not going to get the same sensory experience if we can't use coal. And I think we're just going to have to accept that.
Yep. I suppose that might be the case. Okay, any other comments? I'm just scrolling through what we've had. There's a comment a bit about my canals talk, and I've put a link in there to our YouTube channel, which has all our talks so far, or at least all of I've managed to edit and put up there, including the one on canals. So have a look. Go to YouTube and type in Greenwich Industrial History, and you'll find it. Elizabeth says they've been running on natural gas at Kew since we reopened in 1974. Yes, of course there will be costs, but museums using old coal boilers are simply running down their assets. Elizabeth, do you want to come in if your connection will stand it? I know you're having problems. Do you want to say something, Elizabeth? Are you there? Earth to Elizabeth. No, I think.
May
Oh,
I-
hello. Yeah, go ahead, Jean.
Right, may I say something about accreditation? I haven't found, we would become, I'm Coshel Watertown Historic Garden Trust, and we would go down the route of getting accreditation, but it just didn't seem suitable because we just don't have, the accreditation seems to be very much geared to museums and collections.
It is.
And it just wasn't suitable to bother to spend that money to it just wasn't a suitable qualification to have.
Absolutely, it's not suitable for every site. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So it's not. There's no. Don't feel bad about that, Jean. You
No,
know,
I don't. But it's a pity that you know. I mean,
yeah.
They say, "Oh, you're not accredited." You think, hang on.
Okay. Just for everybody else who's still on, which is most of you, this will be, when I get around to editing it, be on our YouTube channel at some point in the near future. I just need to find, it takes several hours to edit the audio and video and then upload it. But it will be there. So all the slides that Mike has put up there will be available for everybody on YouTube. Mike, are you going to, when are you going to have a meeting for the sort of London, most people here are London. When is your meeting likely to be, and how do we find out about it?
Next month, and I will be emailing around everybody. So I'll make sure Greenwich is on the list.
Good.
So you
is
can.
It going to be in Crossness or somewhere else?
And this next round of meetings will be online.
Right.
I do want a physical meeting, but that's going to be later on in the year. But the next one will be online again.
Okay.
Can I ask, please? Can you hear me?
Yes, go on. Hold on a minute. Just a minute, Mary. Just. Yep. Yes, go ahead, Mary. You want a question?
I'd like to know. I actually am involved in a project called Deptford Working Histories, which is. I'm a member of the Greenwich Industrial Society, but how would I, as if you like, a baby sister, set up next to Greenwich, get involved with the meeting that you've just announced?
Email me, Mary. Email me, and I'll add you to the circulation.
How do I get your email?
I can give you stuff, Mari. I'll give you the details.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and keep looking at our site, and we'll have details on the Facebook group. And Mary Mills is a great communicator between all of us, so it will all be there. Any final comments? I think this has been a good discussion, and thank you very much indeed to Mike. Mary, do you want to say a final word, because it's now 8:45 just about? So
I think it's all gone very well. We've got a lot of interesting people here, including, as I say, our New York branch. And to thank to hope we see you all again. And I'm sorry about next time, but there will be something on, and we'll get the word around, even if it's only me again.
Yeah,
thank you
just,
all.
if you missed it, we've had a dropout from the person who was going to talk in the April talk. So Mary is working herself. Yeah, and that was only a couple of hours ago. So Mary is really trying to find somebody else. But there should be somebody on the 19th of April.
I said he couldn't make next month.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh no.
It's because he's got to go off and make a film for somebody important, I think.
Fine. So Helen O'Hara has put her email address on the chat. So if you'd like to have a look at that, hohara@museumoflondon.org.uk should be useful.
That's it. Only if you're interested in accreditation, that was for that inquiry that just came in. If you wanted to drop me a line, then.
Helen, are you in London or are you at the Docklands Museum?
I am based at Museum of Docklands every Wednesday, And then on a Tuesday and some Mondays I work from home, but I'm on that email address. That's the best way.
I'll email you because I was very involved with the museum before it opened. And
yes,
there's a number of things. We gave three van loads of stuff to you.
Oh, well, I'm not in the curatorial department. I might be able to put you in touch with somebody.
Anyway.
And if anybody else wants to contact each one another, if you register by Eventbrite, I have your email address. So contact me, you have my email address, and I can put you in touch with other people. But I'm not going to do a mass email because that's difficult. But yeah, just contact me and I can put you in touch with other people. Okay. I think, Mike, thank you very much.
Yes.
Great talk.
Nice to talk to you. Thank you.
And thank you for spending your time all the way from Manchester. And it shows the power of what we can do now. As you say, everything is online. You didn't have to get on a train to Euston and across London. You're there at home and you can go and have a cup of tea or something stronger.
Absolutely. Well, possibly even something stronger at this time of night. Yes.
I've already had my, what is it? There it is. Yes. Now empty. I need to refresh it. Okay. So thank you very much indeed, Mike. Keep a look on our website, our Facebook group for Greenwich Industrial History, both for the next event in April, whatever that might be, and also the May event, which will be about the Museum of Slavery and Freedom, and also for when things go online on YouTube. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Mike. Good to see you today. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.